we all know in the 13th chapter, there was some discussion about the three modes. So can I like quickly can you like think what are the topics that was discussed in 13? Like a major topic, one or two.
Haribol Prabhuji.
Yes, I guess.
So yeah, Arjuna asked question to Lord Krishna about he wanted to know about Kshetra, Kshetrajna, who and Gnanam, Gneyam, Prakriti, and Purusha. So he asked 6 questions, and Krishna explained what are those and how it all works.
Perfect, Paresh bro. Those are the 6 topics that was inquired by Arjuna in the 13th chapter. So we saw Kshetra is actually the body, the place. Kshetragya is the knower of the body. It could be the super soul or it could be the individual soul. And then there is Jnanam, which is knowledge, Gyam, which is the object of knowledge. And then there are 2 topics, Prakriti and Purusha. So Purusha is the living entity. When he is in the mood of enjoying the material world, he is called as Purusha, the Jiva. He is also the Kshetragya. And if you consider the Purusha as the Supreme Lord, then he is also Kshetragya as Super Soul. So they kind of, those terms can denote both. Here in this case, it is the Jiva, the enjoyer, Purusha. And then there is one topic called Prakriti. Prakriti is material nature. So Krishna predominantly described about the living entities and about their interaction with the material nature in 13th chapter. While discussing, he mentioned that how the living entity is caught up in the material existence because of its association with the material modes. So the verse 13.22, Purusha Prakriti Stohi Bhungte Prakriti Jan Gunan Karanam Guna Sangosya Sadasad Yoni Janmashu. So he says, Purusha Prakriti Stohi, because the living entity is situated in the material nature and interacts and associates with Karanam Guna Sangasya, because it associates with the modes of material nature, it gets bound and again takes birth. So far the Jiva was explained, material nature was explained, and it was also said that because of the association of the modes, the living entity is taking birth in the samsara again and again. However, Krishna did not in detail explain the modes. So far, anywhere in the Bhagavad Gita, the topic of modes were mentioned. Right from 2nd chapter, it was mentioned about the modes as the reason for various things. However, never like modes were discussed in detail. So right in the beginning of Bhagavad Gita itself, Krishna says in the 3rd chapter, because of the modes, no one can keep quiet even for a moment. So you can never not work because the modes push a person. So modes were there from the beginning of the Bhagavad Gita. However, they were not in detail discussed. And that's why in this chapter, Krishna is going to describe, because there is other reason also. Arjuna asked about Prakriti, that is material nature. So material nature cannot be completely described without touching on the topic of the modes. So if you remember one of the famous verses that we saw earlier, Daivihi Esha Gunamayi Mama Maya Duratteya. So there Krishna is describing the external energy, material nature, Maya. And the description he gives is Daivi because she comes from him. She is also an energy of Krishna. So that's why she is Daivi. Daivihi Esha Gunamayi. So how he describes material nature is Gunamayi, one who is made of the material modes. So that is how intrinsically that the topic of material modes is connected with the topic of material nature. So without understanding the 3 modes, we haven't understood anything about the material world. So that is why Krishna is now choosing to explain this knowledge to Krishna. And Krishna also mentioned in the 13th chapter 24th verse that one who understands this philosophy concerning material nature, the living entity, and the interaction of the modes of nature is sure to attain liberation. However, Krishna did not discuss the modes of material nature in detail for the knowledge to be complete. So that's why he's taking up this topic in an individual chapter 14, named dedicatedly for the modes, 3 modes of material nature. And the discussion about the modes from here on will continuously pop up in 17th chapter and again in 18th chapter. So this is some kind of an understanding about how the Gita is progressing from chapter 13 to chapter 14. So is it kind of clear? Because we discussed the Prakriti, material nature, but the material modes were not discussed. So that's why Krishna is continuing to explain in this chapter. So, so in as an overview, what is going to happen in this chapter is we're just going to see what are those three modes that Krishna was speaking about. How does the jiva actually associate? Because jiva is superior, modes are inferior. How come they are so strong that where is their like how did they come in touch with each other, and what happens due to the result of the association of the gunas? What are the characteristics of a person who's associated with a particular guna, and how does one become free from guna, which is the most important knowledge about all the knowledge about material modes. So to know about material modes is something, to know exactly how to get out of the modes is the most important knowledge. So that will also be discussed here in this chapter. So this is even like Baldev Vidyabhushan also says, there are three things discussed in this topic in this chapter. He says the cause of the bondage is the material modes. First, knowledge. Second, they manifest three different types of results according to goodness, passion, and ignorance. And the third is how to transcend the modes. That's all. These are the three things discussed in this particular chapter. So there are totally 27 verses only in this chapter, but it's like a heavily loaded chapter. Like it has a lot of details to discuss. We'll see how much we can. So the verses 1 to 9 actually in generically discusses about how the material mode conditions the spirit soul. If the spirit soul has to be conditioned, then it has to come in touch with the material nature. So Krishna will explain how did the soul come in contact with the material nature, and then he will explain how the modes are binding the conditioned souls. What are their characteristics of each mode, how they bind. And then in the next section, verses 10 to 18, now that the conditioned soul is bound, so does he like develop a particular predominant mode? If so, how do we know? And what happens because of a particular mode becoming predominant? So what is the results of acting in a particular mode, that is living in a particular mode? And what is the effect or results of dying in a particular mode? If a person is cultivating a particular mode throughout his life, and when he dies, he's going to die in that mode pretty much. So what happens when a person dies in goodness or passion or ignorance? The same way, when he lives, if he is under the control of one of these modes, how does he live? So all those things are discussed between verses 10 to 18. And the last section, the dominating topic of the last section is transcending the three modes of material nature. Now that we know how it's affecting the conditioned soul, now we will see the process to transcend these three material modes. So this is the broad classification of the whole chapter. Is there any questions or something that anyone wants to ask before we jump into the first section? Okay. So there is a side knowledge that I would like to give. I know this is like too in detail for the course. Still, I have this itch to share it. So like we all know like how Bhagavad Gita is divided into three sections. Like the first section predominantly discusses about karma, the last section discusses about jnana, the center section discusses about bhakti, right? This is how means we kind of know. The deep, a little more in detail if we want to see, the first section shows how karma leads to bhakti, and only through bhakti you can achieve perfection. And the last section explains how jnana actually finally leads to bhakti, and only with the help of bhakti, even jnana yogis will be able to achieve perfection. So we will see that conclusion in the end of this chapter very, very clearly. But this is the general thing that is happening at the Bhagavad Gita. That is why the bhakti is kept in the center. Vishnu Thakur says, because karma and jnana, only when they are in touch with bhakti, they have some glory. So that is why bhakti is kept in the center. So there we also see this modern sandwich analogy. There is bread, like there's two pieces of bread, but like there is the main thing in the center. So some devotees give this. It's a very contemporary analogy. But traditionally, acharyas have given two analogies. One is a chain with a pendant. Pendant is in the center. So similarly, bhakti is in the center. And the other analogy that Bhakti Baldev Vidyabhushan ji gives is a jewel box. So the jewel is in the center. There is a there's a box, the bottom of the box and the top of the box for protection. So karma and jnana are there, and then in the center, the gem is bhakti. It is kept. So like that. So basically, these analogies are to indicate that bhakti is the process without which either a jnana yogi or a karma yogi will not be able to achieve perfection. So we will see how this particular conclusion is derived at indirectly by this telling of material modes by Krishna. So Krishna is a very strategist, like a supreme strategist. So in the structure of Bhagavad Gita, there are certainly so many messages. So one of the deep, subtle messages is that without the touch of bhakti, without the help of bhakti, even jnana yogis or karma yogis will not be able to get liberation. They may achieve freedom from sinful reactions, they can go to higher planetary systems, they can go to Satyaloka, but they won't be able to liberate themselves without the help of Bhakti Yoga. So we will see that towards the end when the last verses come together. So I just wanted to put this thought so that it sits with you, and throughout the chapter we will see how it all leads to Bhakti and how Srila Prabhupada is perfect in the way he writes his commentaries. So we will see that also. So verses 1 to 9, the overarching topic is material modes conditions the spirit soul. So far you're with me? Is there, like, I'm making sense? Okay, thank you. So verses 1 to 2 are just the glorification of the knowledge to be presented in this chapter. So Krishna takes it a point to introduce the topic and to glorify the topic, because it kind of invokes some amount of reverence and eagerness in the listener. So Krishna says, Parambuya pravakshami jnananam jnanamuttamam yagyatva munaya sarve param siddhim itogata. So the translation is, Krishna says, like, again, I shall declare to you the supreme wisdom, the best of all knowledge, knowing which all the sages have attained the supreme perfection. So the question is, what is the knowledge discussed in this chapter? We saw already, it's about the three material modes. Because this knowledge is one of the important knowledge when concerning any knowledge about Prakriti and Jiva. Prakriti is material nature, Jiva is living entity. So why are we discussing this topic? How is the Jiva going to extricate himself or herself from the material nature? That's why we are trying to understand material nature, so that we know how to get out of the material nature. That's the focus of Bhagavad Gita. We're not like scientists trying to understand a chemical table in detail. What is the compound? All these things. Bhagavad Gita does not discuss material nature like that. Bhagavad Gita says there is earth, water, fire, air, ether, mind, intelligence, false ego. Understand this bigger structure, get out of this structure. That is the purpose of life. Whereas modern scientists, they try to go in detail. It seems like they have more knowledge, but their knowledge is to trying to control the material nature, which will actually make them implicate themselves more and more. But Bhagavad Gita is giving a bird view kind of a knowledge about material nature. So the idea is we extricate ourselves from the material nature, understand overall, and get out of this place. That's what we need to kind of understand. So that's why here, when it comes to the knowledge of Prakriti and Jiva, without knowing Gunas, a person will not be able to overcome the material nature. So that is why this is a very important part of the knowledge. That's why Krishna says this knowledge is the best among all the knowledges that we have discussed so far. So we can say, why is he saying this as best? Because devotional service, knowledge about devotional service should be the best. But why is this knowledge about three modes is considered the best? Baldev Vidyabhushanji writes, it's the best among all topics concerning Jiva and Prakriti. So because the word Jnananam Jnanam Uttamam is used, that Jnana is not just knowledge. That Jnana is the Jnana Yoga process of knowledge, like the process of knowledge, Jnana system. There is Karma Yoga, there is Jnana Yoga. So that Jnananam Jnanam Uttamam could also denote to this system of Jnana Yoga. So among the various knowledges in the system of Jnana Yoga, the knowledge about the three modes is considered as the best. So how can knowledge about the modes lead one to perfection? So the next question is, if that's the case, like, okay, this knowledge is about knowledge of the three modes, how can this lead to perfection? So how that leads to perfection is, first of all, a person understands who he is, how he is caught up in the material nature or the material modes. Then he'll be able to understand when a person actually goes to that stage, as per Bhagavad Gita, when a person comes to that stage of Brahma Bhuyaya Kalpate, means then from there, na sochati na kanshati sama sarveshu bhuteshu madhvaktim lavate param. From that stage, he understands I have tried my best. Beyond this, only Krishna can help me. So he will naturally take up to bhakti if he wants to extricate himself. So if he understands himself, his own real position in this material world, naturally he can reach out to the Supreme Lord easily. So that is why this knowledge will eventually lead to the knowledge of devotional service so that he can achieve perfection. And here it is as like, why is Krishna saying, again I shall tell you? If it's like, if he's going to tell again, he should have told that knowledge earlier. If he's speaking about material modes because it was not spoken earlier, but you see the second word in Sanskrit means I'm going to speak to you again, bhuya. So if there was knowledge about modes were not spoken earlier, then why is he saying that I'm going to explain to you again? So the understanding is, earlier also Krishna established the importance of bhakti or superiority bhakti. So in this chapter also, ultimately, the focus is not just knowing about the modes. The focus is how bhakti is powerful. So that is why he says he's going to tell again how bhakti is the ultimate process to overcome the material nature. So that's why it said, I'm going to tell you again in a different viewpoint. I have already told it through Karma Yoga. I have already told it directly by Bhakti Yoga. Now I'm going to tell you in a new perspective the same knowledge, how Bhakti is great. So here, like Srila Prabhupada's purport points are there. I don't want to spend so much time in the initial verses, then there's like a lot more there. So we'll just go quickly through these. So from 7th chapter to 12th chapter, Srila Prabhupada says Krishna explained about the uh, supreme absolute truth, Bhagavan, in the central Bhakti chapters, 6 chapters. So now the Lord is going to explain like the knowledge about the 3 modes. Prabhupada says if it is understood through what do you call, like philosophical speculation, the system of Jnana Yoga, even if a person understands the 3 modes through the system of Jnana Yoga, he will eventually come to the position of devotional service, because only when a person humbly develops knowledge, there is a chance he can extricate himself from the material world by the association of a devotee. So we already saw this, how due to the association of the material modes, the person is entangled in the material world. So that is why Krishna is explaining what those modes of nature are, how they bind, and how we can achieve liberation from them. So in this particular chapter, like we already discussed all these points through those questions, how this knowledge is the best of all the knowledge about concerning about the material nature and jiva. And knowing this, great sages have achieved perfection. And so now Krishna is going to explain the same knowledge in a better way in the sense how modes also will lead to like eventually overcoming the modes needs bhakti. And this knowledge is far, far superior to all other processes of knowledge. So Prabhupada also writes here clearly, this knowledge is superior to all other processes of knowledge, that is Jnana Yoga system. So thus it is expected that one who understands this 14th chapter will attain perfection. So this is about the first verse that Krishna says, I am repeating to you this particular knowledge, knowing which you will be able to achieve perfection. Now Krishna is saying, if by becoming fixed in this knowledge, one can attain to the transcendental nature like my own. So Krishna is saying, if a person becomes fixed in this knowledge of material modes, he can actually achieve transcendental nature like my own. Vishnu Chakravarti translates Sadharmyam as form like Krishna. That is Sarupya Mukti, same form as Krishna while being in the spiritual world. So in this way, this verse also establishes what is the advantage of knowing this particular knowledge. And so does attaining the same nature means we will become God? Because the natural question that comes is Sadharmyam. One can attain the same nature like me, then people think, oh, can I also become God by knowing this knowledge? Prabhupada clearly writes, no. Same nature here means same nature as the Lord qualitatively, not quantitatively. So qualitatively, Krishna is also Sachidananda. The soul is also Sachidananda. So that aspect will be realized by knowing this knowledge. So what is transcendental nature? Is it not opposed to the material variety? Because there is a word here. One can attain to the transcendental nature like my own. And Vishnu Chakravarti translates this as like my own form, like my own. So then the natural question is there form in the spiritual world? I thought like spiritual world is without variety. So Srila Prabhupada clarifies, no, Material variety is only a perverted reflection of spiritual variety. Because there is variety in the spiritual world, we can see variety here in the material world. Whatever is there in the original is what is reflected in the reflection. So hence spiritual world is not devoid of form. So Prabhupada makes this point. And also, what is transcendental knowledge? Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport that knowledge which is not contaminated by the three modes of nature is called transcendental knowledge. So that's what a disciple receives from the spiritual master, because the knowledge that he receives is passed down through the parampara from Krishna. So that knowledge is not within the three modes. That knowledge is actually transcendental knowledge. And Srila Baldev Vidyabhushan states that how do we attain this transcendental knowledge? He says, we attain this knowledge by worshipping the feet of our spiritual master. That this knowledge about overcoming the modes, this can be achieved only by worshipping the feet of our spiritual master. So now we saw in these first two verses how Krishna glorified the knowledge that he is going to speak. And then now in the verses 3 and 4, Krishna is going to explain how did the soul come in contact with the material nature. So this is what is Krishna speaking in the Bhagavad Gita about this topic. Mama yonir mahad brahma dasmin garbham dadamyaham sambhavaha sarva bhutanam tato bhavati bharata. That is, Krishna says the total material substance called Mahat Tattva or Pradhana or Brahman, these are all same words here in this particular place, is the source of birth. That the material nature is the mother and Krishna is the father who impregnates all the souls in the womb of the material nature. So the gist of this verse is material nature is the mother, Krishna is the father, and Krishna as father injects all the living entities into the womb of mother material nature. And that's how the living entities come in contact with the material nature. Otherwise, material nature does not go and capture the souls. So souls also cannot by their own come in touch with the material nature. It's Krishna who puts them in touch with the material nature. And if you read these purports and also similar section in third canto, Srila Prabhupada goes into this question about the Jiva fall, which is like a very big thing in the devotee circle, like how did the Jiva come? Prabhupada clearly writes, somehow by chance. Means we can see when Srila Prabhupada gives us the essence in everything that he does, and he says somehow by chance. And there are other places where Prabhupada says, don't figure out, get out of material nature. Don't try to figure out how you came into the material nature. Like, do things in such a way that you can get out of the material nature. So here also Krishna is using the same focus. Krishna is not saying why did he keep them in touch with material nature. He only says how they came in touch with material nature. I put them in touch. So how does the living entity come in contact with the material nature? This combination of the material nature and the living entity is made possible by the Supreme God himself. That's what Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport. And what is Brahman in this verse? Because Brahman usually refers to impersonal effulgence of Krishna. But Brahman can mean many things. Brahman can mean the Jiva. Brahman can mean, here in this place, Mahat Tattva. Mahat Brahma is actually Mahat Tattva. So Mahat Tattva is the combination of all material elements, like 24 elements. 24 elements are actually 5 gross senses, 5 subtle senses, and then like mind, intelligence, false ego, material consciousness or contaminated consciousness. And the 5 elements, earth, water, fire, air, ether, and sound, touch, form, all these 5 subtle elements. So all these put together forms 24. So these 24 put together is called as Mahat Tattva. And in that, when Krishna glances at the Mahat Tattva, he injects time factor and the living entities along with their karma, swabhava, and all these things. So it's a detailed chapter, the thing that we see in Bhagavatam. But here, Prabhupada slightly explains it in the purport. So in essence, Mahat Tattva is the total material substance into which Krishna puts the living entities. So that Mahat Tattva is called as Brahman. So the 24 elements beginning from earth, water, fire, air, and are all material energy, and they constitute what is called as Mahat Brahma, or the great Brahman, the material nature. So this is what Prabhupada writes here in the purport. There's a living entities come out of the material nature. Then there are other questions that many people like creators, there is no soul, like we are all created from some interactions of the material element. Srila Prabhupada heavily condemns that. He says, no, material nature is not the cause of the birth of the living entity. So in this way, in here he gives the famous example of a scorpion laying its eggs in a pile of rice. And then later the eggs, actually, there's scorpions that come out of the eggs. It's not that the scorpions came out of rice. They actually, the eggs were laid by scorpion, and then suddenly one day you see so many scorpions coming out of rice. It does not mean they're coming out of the rice. Rice is not giving birth. The mother had actually laid eggs long back. So similarly here, Krishna has invested the living entities in the womb of Mother Nature. It's not that she is producing all the souls. Soul is eternal. It's never produced at any particular time. So that's what Srila Prabhupada explains. So this is about the third verse that we saw, that how Krishna is the seed-giving father. Mother material nature is the mother for the birth of the living entities. And he says in the next verse, verse 4, that I am the seed-giving father. He emphasizes it. People may think, okay, initially Krishna gave the souls in the womb of material nature, and that's it. But Krishna says, no, anytime any living entity takes a new form in this particular material nature, and I'm still the seed-giving father, because initially I put them in the womb of material nature, every time they come out in various forms, whether it is grass or whether it is ant or Lord Brahma, every time they take a new form, the conditioned soul, the original reason, the original seed-giving father remains Krishna, and the mother remains Mother Nature. So it should be understood that all species of life, O son of Kunti, are made possible by birth in this material nature, and that I am the seed-giving father. So Krishna says, I am the reason for their appearance in this material world. So material nature is the mother and Supreme Lord is the father. Not only at the time of creation of the universe is the material nature the mother and Krishna the father, but all times they remain the mother and father. The living entities are combinations of material nature and spiritual nature. So the material nature is the body, all the elements of our body, subtle and gross, and the spiritual nature is ourselves, the self, the spirit soul. So this is the combination for any living entity in this particular material nature. So we discussed the first 4 verses. In first 2 verses, Krishna glorified the knowledge. In the next 2 verses, Krishna spoke how did this meeting of the material nature happened with the living entity. So Krishna says, I personally injected them into the material nature, and that's how they came in contact with the material nature. So that is the gist of the first 4 verses. So now we have the remaining 4 verses of this particular section, verses 5, 6, 7, 8, and 9. So how do the modes of material nature bind or condition the soul? So now that the conditioned soul has come in touch with material nature, the story has only progressed thus far, that the soul has come in contact with the material nature. So now we have to know what happens after that. Where does the story begin? So it's after this that the soul comes in contact with the material nature, and what happens is a very tragic thing. Mamayonir Mahad Brahma Tasmin Garbham Dadamyaham Sambhava Sarva Bhutanam Tato Bhavati Bharatha. I'm sorry, I miscopied the verse. This is verse 3. So this verse is supposed to be Sattvam Rajas Tamaiti Guna Prakriti Sambhava. Yes, Sattvam Rajas Tamaiti Guna Prakriti Sambhava Nibadnanti Mahabaho Dehe Dehi Namavyam. Krishna says, material nature consists of 3 modes: goodness, passion, and ignorance. When the eternal living entity comes in contact with nature, O mighty armed Arjuna, he becomes conditioned by these modes. So there is a hand raised. So let's take the question and then go into the 5th verse. Hi Krishna, Rohan Prabhu.
Hare Krishna Prabhu.
Hi Krishna.
Prabhu, I just had a question. You said that anytime the soul takes up a new body, Krishna still is the seed-giving father.
Mm-hmm.
So I was a little confused about that point, because when the soul takes up a new body,
yes,
is it not just the material nature acting under the supervision of Krishna? Like,
yeah.
Krishna still has something to do with it, or
means in the sense of there is an ultimate cause and there is an immediate cause. So in that sense, like Krishna is the reason for everything. So in an ultimate sense, he is saying, ultimately, I'm the seed-giving father. Means he's not speaking about them being handled through the system of karma. He's saying ultimately, like they are never coming from the material nature as such. So their origin is from me, and I'm the one who's they are coming from me. That is the main point that is focused in those two verses. They are not coming from material nature just because we see them taking birth like from the material nature. It looks like that to emphasize that it is not from the material nature, it is from himself. That's why he's saying it's not only in the beginning of the creation I invested them. So because I invested them in the beginning, that is why they are continuing to come here. And as like there may be there may be an immediate cause for the impregnation of the soul, but the ultimate cause is Krishna. That is the understanding.
Understood. Thank you.
Hare Krishna. So in this fifth verse, Krishna says, like, what happens when the soul comes in contact with the material nature? So if you have access to the verse, there is one word, which is the crux. Like that one word explains everything. So I'm not sure if you have, for a crucial verse, I forgot to paste the right verse. So, if you have access to the Sanskrit book, so there is a word called
Guna.
No. There is a word which says what happens when the modes come in contact.
Nibadnanti.
Yes, Nibadnanti. So the modes actually, yes, the modes actually bind the soul. So there is another word-to-word translation for the word guna. Guna means the material modes. Guna also means rope. So how a rope binds, similarly, the material modes also actually bind a person. So that's what is this verse saying, that the Sattvam, Rajas and Tamas, three material modes. So they are Prakriti Sambhava. They are born of material nature. And it's a very complicated topic, honestly. Modes are also inconceivable to a large extent because it's very difficult to analyze the modes because we means the more we understand, it feels like more insidious because they are Prakriti Sambhava, they are born from the modes, and the modes are called as Gunamaya. The Prakriti material nature is called as Gunamaya. That is, the mode is made up of, the material nature is made up of three modes. So she comes from the material nature, at the same time, she is what is made up, making the material nature. And it is inside us and outside us and everywhere. So all these objects, the whole material creation actually manifests from the three modes. And then the three modes are also inside us through the past conditionings, and it influences our mind, body, and mind, intelligence, and false ego. And they are all even produced from different modes. Like false ego comes from a mode of ignorance, intelligence comes from passion, and mind comes from goodness. So their cause is also modes. They are influenced by modes, and they act under modes. And so it's like quite a intense interaction with the modes that the living entity has. And the most amusing, or the most astonishing thing about Krishna's creation is, even though we are being pushed by these modes so much, they're just not so easily recognizable. And means it's the speciality of Bhagavad Gita that Bhagavad Gita presents this knowledge in such an accessible form. So this is, you don't find this in any other religious scripture. This is a special topic of Bhagavad Gita. Of course, the Sankhya system speaks about it, but Krishna gives here an easy way to get out of this modes also through the practice of bhakti. So in that sense, Bhagavad Gita stands very tall amongst any religious scripture or any other so-called spiritual scripture or religious scripture that we see in this world, because it's more universal in its application. It's not only when you chant this mantra this happens, it's also like how the material nature itself works, how the universe works. So only the creator of the universe can give such inside knowledge, and that's what Krishna is like freely sharing here. This, like, you have a house and you have a lock and you give the key to all your neighbors. So something like that. Krishna puts a prison and then gives the key to open that lock of the prison in, like, right there. Any prisoner who really wants to go out can use the key, unlock, and can get out. So that's like that. So Krishna is giving us right here, what is the key to actually get out of the material entanglement. So this is the most important word, nibadhananti, because it actually binds the conditioned soul. So this combination, I think I just copy and pasted the previous slide and forgot to edit it. Hare Krishna. So in the particular verse, purport 5, Prabhupada makes the one important point that Prabhupada makes is, how does the mode bind? Because now we saw from the verse that what is the action of the modes? They bind the conditioned soul. But Srila Prabhupada gives more details in purport. He says, how does the soul, how is the soul bound by the material nature? He says, the different material nature induces the soul to act in different ways. Goodness, passion, ignorance, they all force the person to act in different ways. So because they act under the influence of those modes, they get karma. And they get like kind of caught up in the happiness and distress. And then that begins the story, sojourn of the soul in the material world. So as soon as a person acts on the material, acts under the influence of the material nature, then his bondage is like continual. So that is how the material nature binds the soul. So now the next verse, Tatra Sattvam. So we are going to now see about the mode of goodness. What is the binding force of the mode of goodness? What are the effects of characteristics of mode of goodness? We will see that in verse 6. In verse 7, we will see what are the characteristics of mode of passion, how it binds the soul. And in verse 8, we will see how the mode of ignorance binds, or what are its characteristics, how does it bind the soul. And in verse 9, we will see a summary of all the three modes. So first two verses were glorification of the knowledge. The next two verses is how did the material nature and soul come together? That is, Krishna put them together. And the verse 5, we saw that what happens to the soul when it comes to the material nature, it gets bound. Now in verse 6, 7, and 8, we are going to see the characteristics of each of the modes of material nature. And in 9, we will see a summary of their characteristics. So now in the verse 6, we are seeing the description of mode of goodness. So we can see the translation. It is clearly stated like it's purer than other modes. Among the three modes, Sattva Guna is considered as the purest mode. And what are the characteristics of mode of goodness? It is illuminating. What do you mean by illuminating?
It leads you to real knowledge.
Yes, it's basically connected to knowledge. Yeah, thank you, Manpreet. And frees one from all sinful reactions. Because it is pure, as we saw earlier, because it is pure, it kind of cuts the reactions, sinful reactions, which is like not so pure. So what is the binding force of mode of goodness? So this sounds so perfect, right? It's pure, it illuminates a person, it frees one from all sinful reactions. So this must be the best thing that we can get in the material nature. So what Krishna is saying, no, they also bind you. So then what is the binding force with which mode of goodness binds the soul? Is a sense of happiness. It's not happiness. It's a sense of happiness. It's a feeling of, I'm good. That kind of like a confidence, like a sense. And then a sense of knowledge that there is a manifestation of illumination. So there is also a sense of knowledge that this person embodies. So these are, Prabhupada gives example like scientists, philosophers, poets, all in their heads. No, their feet is not in the ground. Like, I'm just joking. Like, so they're all like kind of engaging with knowledge a lot. So they have this kind of a feeling, means they kind of have some more knowledge than other people. And also there is a sense of happiness because their work is not too gross. They're not like working in mines or in all those kind of like difficult working situations which influences a person. So in that sense, they kind of have a sense of happiness and sense of knowledge. But the downfall is they can also become proud. So when they develop pride that I am happy and I'm very knowledgeable, so there is no way they can be humble to know spiritual knowledge because all they know is material knowledge. If they want to hear transcendental knowledge, they need humility. That's when this becomes an obstacle. Because they have that regular like a theme song of themselves. I'm happy and I'm knowledgeable. So then it kind of stops them from listening to spiritual knowledge. So in that sense, that knowledge, very knowledge, leads to ignorance because of pride. When they become proud, the knowledge itself becomes the source of their ignorance and binds them. So this is how the mode of goodness, even though they are much better people compared to those people in mode of ignorance and passion, they can become proud. They can become very complacent when it comes to spiritual life because they are already very comfortable. And they look around and they see everybody else is so miserable. They find themselves the most happy within this world. So they feel like we are the best of the Lord. So what are you going to offer me more? So that kind of a laziness that creeps into when it comes to practicing spiritual life. So this is some basic introduction for mode of goodness. Then what is it? So this is what we saw. So the difficulty here is that when a living entity is situated in the mode of goodness, he becomes conditioned to feel that he is advanced in knowledge and is better than others. And in this way, he becomes conditioned. So this is what Srila Prabhupada writes in the purport. I have tried to summarize the purport as much as possible. So if you go through with this, most of it would be covered. Prabhupada says they are proud of their knowledge, and a sense of advanced happiness binds them and keeps them in samsara because they have like refined intelligence and they also engage in knowledge. So it kind of makes them very sense of happiness. Again, Prabhupada uses sense of happiness. It's not like a real thing. It's like a feeling. So feel a sort of material happiness because of improved living condition. That's another thing. And destiny, Prabhupada says, no likelihood of liberation. Mode of goodness is not going to offer them liberation. Prabhupada in other places says, mode of goodness, passion, ignorance can be compared to having a golden shackles in a prison, having a silver shackles in a prison, and having an iron shackles in a prison. Prabhupada said at the end of the day, shackle is a shackle. Does not matter whether it is gold, silver, or metal, iron. So that's why here we say, Prabhupada keeping up with that conclusion, there is no likelihood of liberation from this mode. So then Srila Prabhupada writes about verse 7 on mode of passion. So what are the characteristics of the mode of passion and what are the binding forces? So Rajo Ragatmakam Vidhi Trishna Sangha Samudbhavam Tannibadnati Kaunteya Karma Sangena Dehinam. So actually this verse packs a lot of things. In the commentaries also there is a lot. So let's see the translation of Prabhupada. The mode of passion is born of unlimited desires and longings, O son of Kunti. And because of this, the embodied living entity is bound to material fruit of actions. So what's happening in this particular mode is, let's just dwell on the Sanskrit a little bit. So Raja is passion. Raga Atmakam. What is this passion made of? It is Raga Atmakam. It is like made of Raga. What is Raga? Raga, Srila Prabhupada, or like Baldev Vidyabhushanji translates Raga as sexual desire. And if you see, Srila Prabhupada also begins the purport like that. The attraction between opposite sexes. That's what he says is the Raga. So that Raga means we also know Raganuga Bhakti, Ragatmika Bhakti and all that. So that Raga that we experience in the spiritual world is actually desire to please Krishna. When that Raga actually gets reflected, this Raga is actually personal sense gratification. So the exact replica of that Adi, like what you call that Raga, is the Raga in the material world, that is sex desire. So this passion is characterized by the sex desire and Trishna Sangha Samudbhavam. In general, it manifests as Trishna and Sangha. Trishna means we know Krishna and this is Trishna. This Krishna is all attractive and Trishna is thirst. So Trishna is thirst and Sangha is attachment. So a person is thirsty or hankering for what he does not have. So a person in the mode of passion the mode of passion will make the person feel hankering for what he does not have. That is called Trishna. And attachment for what he already possesses. Intense attachment for what he already possesses. So this makes them actually unhappy because hankering, he's sad that he does not have it and like anxiously looking forward to it, to have it. And the other one is already he has something, but he fears to lose that. So that way also he is actually like kind of anxious. What will happen if I lose this? So in this way, even though he works hard, karma sangena dehina, because he wants more and he wants to protect what he has to work hard. So that is how the mode of passion binds the living entity, nibadnati, how karma sangena dehina. It makes it bound, it binds the living entity for more fruitive actions. Because I need that, so I need to buy this, I need to own this, I need to enjoy this, I need to go here, I need to go there. So then earn more for that. So then work more for that. So it sounds like Amazon's policy. It's like these are like modern agents of Kali Yuga. So we can see how they are all like agents of Krishna in the way they are powerful, empowered agents of material nature. All the people that are moving the world, so to say, in today's age, they're all, you will see how they are acting to increase mode of passion and ignorance in a lot way, in a natural way. If you have to be really in mode of goodness while dealing with them, we have to be very much rooted. Otherwise, they'll just take us for a ride. Our shopping carts will be filled, our wallet will be emptied. So here, let's see what Prabhupada says in the purport about the mode of passion. So description of mode of passion, Prabhupada writes, is raga. Raga means colored. I think this is from a commentary. So raga means color also. Colored by what? So the person who is in the mode of passion is colored by his desires. If he has a certain desire, like we wear specs, so if he likes something, he will see that through that like glasses. Or otherwise, if he does not like something, he will look it through that particular shade of, I don't like this, so what are the faults in this? So he's basically motivated by his desires. So that is why he is colored. His vision is colored in the material world. So what are the characteristics of mode of passion? We saw intense and unlimited desires and longings of what he does not have, and great attachment to what he already possesses. And how it binds, the mode of passion binds the living entity through attachment to fruitive activities. Because it has to possess more, so it has to work more. So he's very attached to work. And what is the difficulty in mode of passion? So due to hankering for material enjoyments, he works hard to acquire wealth, family, honor, and becomes associated with the fruits of his activities and becomes endlessly bound by such activities and their fruits. So then he goes in again and again in the cycle of birth and death because of he has to suffer or enjoy the reactions of his work. So in the purport, these topics, like these 4 questions, kind of reiterated some points from Prabhupada purports, some extra points also. Now we will see major Prabhupada purport points. Typical characteristics of mode of passion and sexual attraction. Advancement of modern civilization, Prabhupada says, is in mode of passion. The current civilization, the so-called advancement, is very much in mode of passion. The reason is, even like it said, like Kali Yuga is such an age where like even the richest of people are never allowed to rest in this world today. Probably they are the ones who are having like really working hard because they have to keep up their position. So if a person had like $1 billion, why would he have to actually do anything? But they would have various reasons to continue to do what they're doing. However, Prabhupada is saying, even that person is not happy. So what is the other people like hoping to get from like acquiring more money? So if people with more money is like acting in such a way, so that's what is the nature of the material world. He says the advancement of modern civilization is mode of passion. Never stops from hankering and having attachments. Never allows us to be free of these things. And the destiny is, Prabhupada writes a classic statement. He says, if there is no liberation for those in the mode of goodness, what to speak of those who are entangled in the mode of passion? It's like, don't even ask me. Even mode of goodness, there is no liberation. So don't even ask me what about like mode of passion. They're not going to for sure have it. So then the 8th verse is going to discuss about the characteristics of mode of ignorance and the binding force of mode of ignorance. Tamastu agyanajam viddhi mohanam sarvadehinam pramadalasya nidrabis tannibadnati bharata. Tamastu means that is the mode of darkness is born of ignorance, is the delusion of all embodied living entities. The results of this mode are madness, indolence, sleep, which bind the conditioned soul. So for the mode of ignorance, the word used here, tu, Prabhupada also writes, ignorance is actually the word tu here is like very, very significant, because it very clearly says that mode of ignorance is born from ajnana, means it's born from ajnana, ignorance, and it is opposed to both mode of goodness and passion. So in mode of goodness, there is actually knowledge, but in mode of ignorance, there is ajnana, there is ignorance, which is an opposite. And in mode of passion, there is work, but in mode of ignorance, there is laziness and sleep. So it is neither active nor intelligent. So that is the nature of mode of ignorance. It opposes both. And Prabhupada writes, sleep opposes both mode of goodness and passion, because there is no knowledge when we sleep, we are in illusion, and there is no activity when we are sleeping physically also. So it is against both the modes. So what are the characteristics of mode of ignorance? It is illusion. Basically, illusion means misidentified knowledge. Opposite of knowledge is illusion here. Means whatever is right, like say for example, drinking is bad for health. It is knowledge. But if you ask a person who's already addicted to drinking, he'll not be able to means he may know that, but he won't be able to follow. That is because of addiction. But especially when he is drunk, he has no idea about what is reality, what is like, because he is put into an illusory state. So that is the result of mode of ignorance. The characteristics of mode of ignorance is, as soon as the person gets overcome by that mode, his knowledge is lost. He does not know what he is doing is right or wrong, whether it is helpful for him or not. So by definition, mode of ignorance, any activity a person does in mode of ignorance is opposite of truth. We will see more about that. What is the binding force of mode of ignorance? Prabhupada writes, madness, indolence, and sleep, as given in the verse. Pramada, alasya, nidra. Means pramada is madness, indolence is alasya, laziness, nidra is sleep. These are the binding forces, because a person who conducts himself in mode of ignorance will sleep more than what he requires. Basically, like people sleeping at morning 4 and getting up at afternoon 2. This is all like pure mode of ignorance, because it's exactly opposite to knowledge. Night is meant to sleep. Day is meant to actually work. That is why sun is working in a particular cycle. And these people will work exactly against it. They will sleep in the day like owls, and they'll be awake in the night. And that's what is their mode of enjoyment. And that's what is called as mode of ignorance. It is exactly opposite to what is knowledge. So what is the difficulty in mode of ignorance? Prabhupada writes, in the mode of ignorance, due to lack of proper knowledge, one degrades himself instead of making advancement. He can degrade himself into lower species of life. He can degrade himself in this very own life. His financial position can go down. His relationships can be spoiled. His mental balance can be lost. Health, wealth, everything can be affected even in this life. And in the future life, there is all the danger of actually going into lower species of life because of mode of ignorance. So here are the purport points from Srila Prabhupada. So Prabhupada writes madness. He explains what is madness, because he says there is so many people dying every day. Still the rest of the people who are alive will think they will never die, and they are mad at accumulating money and not caring for eternal spiritual. He says this is madness. And lazy, Prabhupada says, even though they're so active to work, but if you invite them for a spiritual understanding, they are very lazy to come. And sleep, they sleep more than what they require. So in this way, these are the three characteristics or way the mode of ignorance binds a person. And Prabhupada writes, ignorance leads to dejection, like we know, like depression and all these things. Thus prone to addiction to intoxicants and sleeping. Prabhupada writes, the person is in mode of ignorance, but when mode of passion, so he works too much. Sometimes he feels dejected when he does not have. He takes to addiction, getting addicted to some substance, and then he falls more into mode of ignorance, more and more and more and more. So the passionate lifestyle naturally leads a person to eventually to mode of ignorance also. And the destiny is no advancement, only degradation. There is all chances that this person can actually go to lower species of life or lower planetary systems. So these are the three verses, 6, 7, and 8. We saw about the mode of goodness, mode of passion, and mode of ignorance. Now in verse 9, we will see a summary of all these three things. So here is a small table. So Sattvam Sukhe Sanjayati Raja Karmani Bharata Jnanam Avritti Tu Tamaha Pramade Sanjayati Uta. Krishna says that goodness conditions one to happiness, passion conditions one to work, fruit of action, and ignorance binds one to madness. So here we will see whatever so far we have seen in these 3 verses. That in the mode of goodness, the characteristics is illumination, that is knowledge, and freedom from sinful reactions. And the binding force of the goodness is the sense of happiness, sense of knowledge, satisfaction that comes with that. And destination is no liberation. For passion, it is intense, unlimited desires, that is hankering, and great attachment for what he already has. So in that way, he becomes attached to fruitive activities. That is the binding force, forcing one to work more for the sake of enjoying the results. And surely there is no liberation in the mode of passion. And in ignorance, the characteristics of ignorance is illusion. It's just opposite to true knowledge. That's it. And the binding forces, sleep, oversleep, madness, indolence or laziness. And there is surely degradation in the mode of ignorance. So now we have the summary of the verses 14 to 6, where Srila Prabhupada in the verse 9 says, in mode of goodness, there is a sense of satisfaction. In mode of passion, there is greed and honor. These are the effects that will manifest in the person's heart, how they actually feel. One feels satisfied, the other feels greedy, and in mode of ignorance, whatever one does is good neither for him nor for anyone else. So it leads to trouble for himself and for others. That is the definition of mode of ignorance. So we have a short